Hello, everybody who's joining us online for this new Angular Bucharest meetup. We're super excited to have a really special guest with us, Amir from Cyprus, who's going to tell us all about modern end-to-end testing web applications. So before I let Amir introduce himself and give a presentation on Cyprus, just a really short introduction about who you are and some community announcements. And I will have to put my presentation to share the screen. This is always difficult to do. Okay. Let's see, application. There we go. So, there we go. Present. So, we're ngBucharest, the Angular meetup group here in Bucharest. We try to meet as often as we can in this in these places and talk about technology and everything that's going on in the world of Angular and not only. These are our social links. Try to follow us. We try to post as often as we can, resources for the community. Special thanks to Every Matrix who's hosting our event today. Our guest is Amir from Cyprus. We're really glad to have him with us and tell us everything that's been going on with Cyprus lately. Just a few announcements on the upcoming events here in Bucharest. And Amir, I know we talked about this earlier, so heads up. Voxday's front end, one of the biggest front end conferences in Bucharest. It's happening late May. So if you still haven't bought your ticket, we have a discount for the conference. JS Heroes, again, a heads up for Amir, which is happening next week in Cluj. If I know they're sold out, so you might be tricky to get a ticket, but watch out for their videos post-conference. Really awesome lineup for them. If you're interested about conferences abroad, I really recommend to check out NG Vikings. We have a discount for their tickets. As I learned, there's still some tickets left. It's going to be in Copenhagen late May. It's a community-driven conference. Really awesome. Been there, and I highly recommend. Also, Angular DE, NGDE, also in Berlin in late August, and NG Rome in mid-October, which is really awesome to visit Rome in that time of the year. So yeah, those were the announcements from the partner conferences. And yeah, enjoy the event. And Amir, you have the floor after I stop sharing. There we go.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. And I'll just jump right into things. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Can everyone see the screen just fine?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, we're all good. Thanks.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so thanks for everyone for joining me today. We're going to be talking to you about web application end-to-end testing. So let's just jump right into it. Again, thank you for the introduction, but here are my additional details. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about Cyprus. Feel free to email me or direct message me on Twitter. I'll be happy to help out. One other question I have is I can't really see the room, but how many people have heard of Cyprus before? Maybe you can relay the survey back to me.
So I just pointed the camera at the room, so people are still coming.
Okay. Sounds good then. All right. Well, we'll just move along then.
So you asked the question, right?
Yeah. So I was wondering how many people have heard or used Cyprus before.
So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hands up. I guess That's half.
Half, okay, 50%. That's great.
That's good, right?
Yeah, yeah, for the portion of the room, that's wonderful. So yeah, let's just dive into it now. Before we talk about the specifics of Cypress, I like to step back and kind of understand the reasoning why Cypress exists, and why we even test in the first place. Now, when we hear the words end-to-end testing, people already have these preconceived notions about the topic. They've in the past, they probably spent a lot of time chasing flaky tests when they were trying to implement end-to-end tests, or the project became too expensive because so much time was dedicated to doing end-to-end testing, or just doing the testing had slowed down the development of the project. So some people are typically hesitant to do these types of tests. Um, you know, but if we look at the types of tests we write, we have this abstraction called the testing pyramid, which represents, how many tests and what type of tests we write. So at the very bottom, we have unit tests, and as developers, we like to write these because they're very simple and we can write a lot of them. Though the types of tests that we would like to write, which really guarantee the full functionality of our app, are end-to-end tests, and we write less of these. That's why they're at the top of the pyramid, and that's because it's difficult to write these. They can be slower to write, slower to run, and just more costly to implement because it takes longer to get just right. So this lends itself to be a thing that's ignored completely by developers, especially when you're under a deadline trying to get things out the door. But again, at the end of the day, the best type of tests that you can implement to guarantee the success of your app and gain confidence in your app is end-to-end tests. It's best for the users and the business by itself. And the last thing you want to do is you don't want to let your users be the first ones to do your end-to-end testing, right? You don't want to just do some unit tests, ship your product, and then you're gradually going to get users maybe ignoring your app or service altogether because they're seeing flaws and they're not communicating that with you. Some of them do, and that's great, but most users don't immediately start typing up an email back to you. So you don't want users to be the first ones to do these types of tests for you, and this is the costly route because you're just losing customers and users. So yeah, before we progress again to the specifics, I like to kind of look at the historical, progression of various tools that have kind of made development of web applications and just building things on the web easier. So in 2005, we had frameworks like Django and Rails come out, and this kind of was a point of proliferation for creating web applications. We saw Twitter come out, we saw Shopify come out, we saw a lot of very nicely implemented apps come out due to these web application frameworks. They gave us this construct to think about things and to reason about building a web application. And it just made the whole process more accessible and approachable. Then soon after, we had jQuery come out, and that really made JavaScript, significantly easier to implement in across multiple browsers. It kind of normalized all the little all the little details that are off because Firefox is like this and Chrome is like that and IE is like this. So it kind of normalized all those errors and weirdnesses across multiple browsers, and it just made writing JavaScript a little saner. And to a lot of people, jQuery was JavaScript. But after 2006, we start seeing smartphones come out and internet speeds getting faster, and just everything around the web started getting much more solid and much more high quality. JavaScript, I would say, ECMAScript got its act together, better standards, more efforts by larger companies into making it a higher quality platform to write web applications in. And because all these things happen, people's expectation of what software is and could be increased. They expected higher quality. They were using their apps on their phones, and they were seeing these snappy applications that are very easy to use, very responsive. And software just became more of people's daily lives. And those expectations and demands led to people just wanting better experiences overall on the web. And this kind of was a natural fit for nicer frameworks that came out later on, like Angular, like React, like Vue, which enabled the creation of very rich experiences on the web. Now, the trend here in this progression is that more complexity moved from the back end to the front end, right? In the past, we would write almost everything in the back end, and we would render these nice HTML templates and then ship them down the wire, and they would just be, that was it. But now we're pretty much shipping full applications down the wire to the user, and the web browser is just like an application runtime, right? So this is important to note here. And what this trend really is saying to us is that the web went from being stateless to being very stateful. We had very simple pages, just links and images, that was it, to very dynamic pages, and I would say applications that are, replacing full-fledged desktop software. And let's now superimpose the progression of software automation on this. And this is a very simplistic view of things. But Selenium was the awesome tool that we've all used in the past for doing browser testing. And it came out 2004, so it's been around for a while. And it improved throughout the years. And it's been kind of the status quo, and it's been the go-to tool for the industry to do real web browser testing. And to kind of give you a context of where Cypress stands, Cypress came out in 2014, pretty much right around the time where all these awesome front-end frameworks were coming out, like Angular. So, we're talking about doing real browser testing. Now, this can be a difficult thing when people might have that misconception because of how difficult it was to do in the past. So people kind of maybe rely on other things like DOM emulation. Why even use a real browser when I can use something like JS DOM? Well, the thing is, none of your users are using JS DOM. They're not using any DOM emulator to run your app. So to do real user testing and to really gain confidence in the functionality of your app, you need to use a real browser so you can drive real user actions. That's the only way you can truly get full confidence in the functionality of your software. And this all kind of, lends itself to the birth of Cypress. And Cypress is a free and open source MIT licensed tool that you can use to test anything that runs in a web browser. So how do you get started with it? Well, there isn't a whole fuss. There isn't much fuss to getting started with it. All you got to do is just npm install Cypress. And once you do that, you're just going to get everything you need to start testing. And underneath Cypress, we're using very familiar tools like Mocha, Chai, and Sign-On. Mocha is the general testing framework. Chai is for assertions, and Sign-On is to do things like stubbing, mocking, and spying, and so on. And once you got Cypress set up and running, and you boot it right up, this is what you're going to see. Cypress in your development workflow is functions as a desktop application. And I can, here's a screenshot of it, but I can jump in and actually show you the real thing. And feel free to stop me if you have any questions about any of this. Okay. So let me go here. Yeah, go ahead. Yes, no problem. Increase that even more. Okay, so we when you first go ahead and you create a new directory for your project, empty directory. You do the whole spiel, which is npm init, full empty project, and then after that you're gonna install Cypress, right? And then you're done with the installation process. And then Cypress is a binary in your node modules, and you can use npx to kind of boot it up real easily, or you can make your own custom npm scripts. So this is an empty project. Nothing has been done in it, and we've just installed Cypress. So let's go ahead and bring up Cypress, the desktop application, and we use the Cypress open command to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and get that booted up for us. Okay. And everyone's seeing everything fine?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, great. Awesome. Okay, so this is Cypress, and when you first bootstrap your application with Cypress, we're going to include these sample test spec files. And these are just essentially example tests that show you how to use every single command that the Cypress API offers. And there's a ton of them, and they're all documented in our fantastic docs, and you can check those out. But going through these spec files is a nice way to learn Cypress if it's your first time, seeing it, and it just shows you how to use every single, command that Cypress offers. So we're just going to go ahead and run one of these spec files, and all I got to do is just click the name of the spec file here, and then we're going to bring up a real full-fledged version of Chrome, and we're going to just start running these tests. Now, on the right-hand side, this is our actual app. It could be anything, and on the left-hand side, this is what we call the command log, and this shows you all the tests that get ran in your spec file. And up top, we show you the actual endpoint that your app is at right now, the actual full URL. And this is how the Cypress experience looks like when you're running your tests. Now, on the left-hand side, we have the command log, and you can click on any of the tests, and you can see every action and every command essentially that took place. You can see every single assertion that occurred. You can just see everything. Now, if you notice, as I'm scrubbing my cursor across the various commands that took place, you're seeing the right-hand side, the app, kind of change. And that's because Cypress takes a DOM snapshot before and after every single change that your test made. So if I clicked on something, then we're going to take a DOM snapshot at that point and to see how things look like before and after that click. So for example, over here, we're using the type command to just type something into this input box, this little email input box. So we're going to do that. So this is how the world looks like before we type something in, and this is how the world looks like after we type something in, which we just typed in fake@email.com. So we can kind of see how things change before and after we take action. So this is a pretty simple test suite. It's using very common Cypress commands like type, focus, blur, and so on. So these are just things you would be used to doing upon DOM elements like buttons and input boxes and things like that. Yeah. So let's kind of move along. We kind of did a little quick overview, and we saw a little in action. And actually, before we move along, what I just showed you was the Cypress example kitchen sink, and we can actually see the code for that here. Let me zoom that in up a bit. It's actually, we just ran the action spec. And this is how Cypress tests look like. They're all going to be put into the Cypress folder in your project. And that Cypress folder, we bootstrap various, a directory structure. But where your tests go, and the important directory here is this integration folder. And you can place all your spec files here. The one we just ran was action spec, and we can kind of just see that test we were just looking at, which was testing of the type command. And this is how Cypress tests look like. Everything starts off the CY global you're going to get, and you can chain commands on that. So the first thing we did here was, use this get command to get this, element, which was an input box in this case, and we're using, jQuery style selectors to do that. Once we get that element, we can, take action against it. So over here, we're just typing in something, and then once we do that, we can start making assertions against it. So this is generally how Cypress tests look like, and they all branch off the Cypress global over here. So I suggest when you're playing around with Cypress for the first time and bootstrapping things, is just to look over all these spec files. We have things for doing network type requests, like setting up a mock server, stubbing it, and so on. So it's very helpful, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, and so this was the kitchen sink. Now let's take a look at a real app. we go back here, and okay. So we have this example to-do MVC app, which is just a simple to-do application that's kind of used as an example when comparing frameworks and so on. So let's go ahead and I'm in that directory now, so I'm just going to go open that. And in this case, it's just a one spec file. But notice this top part over here. You know, we just started Cypress, but it's giving us a warning saying that, hey, your application server isn't up. And that's true because I never started the application server for this to-do application. Excuse me. So, you know, around the UI of Cypress, we're trying our best to be very helpful to the user. We're always going to try to communicate things that are not in place or wrong or incorrect. Just always trying to communicate, you know, and be helpful when it matters the most. So let's go ahead and start our application server. And I'm just going to start. That's it. Now the application server is up and we're good to go. So let's go ahead and click on the spec file and see how our app looks like. So this is a to-do MVC app, and this test suite is just going through and testing everything about this this application, you know, adding to-dos, removing to-dos, all that good stuff. Now I have to apologize because this was implemented in React. But one thing to point out about Cypress is that Cypress doesn't care what your framework is. It's completely agnostic to the underlying application you're running. You know, it works with anything that runs in the browser, right? So it doesn't matter if it was an Angular, React, or any other framework, or just vanilla JavaScript, it's going to work just fine. So yeah, this was we just ran through this whole test suite and we tested a lot of things here. You know, for example, the first test we did right here was, you know, should focus on to-do input field when page is initially open. So when we were first, you know, arriving at this to-do MVC page, you know, it's nice if we have our input box already focused in that input box, so we can go ahead and start typing up things, right? Typing up to-do items. Well, how do we go about that, doing that? Well, first thing we got to do is visit our application, right? And we're going to use this CY or the Cypress visit command. And we're just visiting the root of the application. Then once we're there, we're going to grab this this input box. I'm sorry, we're going to use the focus command of Cypress, and we're going to essentially get the current element that's focused in the DOM. Great, now that we have that, and we're hoping that's this to-do input box. Once we have that, we can go ahead and make an assertion saying that that hey, that is the currently selected input box the main one that we have here, and that's essentially our test. And we can actually go ahead and see the examples for this. So here we go, app spec. There we go, it's right here. So that whole test is just one simple line. So again, we're using the Cypress focus command to get the currently focused element in the DOM, and then that's it. Then we can make assertions on it, and it's really as simple as that. Yeah. Now, I guess we'll see some things in a little bit. So we'll go back to our presentation for now. Okay, so one of the things you just saw was that, you know, the test ran very fast, and the reason for that has to do with the architecture of Cypress. So let's kind of take a look at a simplistic view of that. So with Cypress, the Cypress test runner, you know, the thing that actually tests your app, exists in the same browser as your app. It runs within the same run loop as your application, which means it knows exactly what's going on. It lives in the same realm, the same world. It can react to the same events, and it just knows whatever is going on at the time you need it to. And this is vastly different from architectures of other frameworks that you've used in the past, most likely Selenium, where things live outside of the browser and they're trying to look, you know, and essentially query the browser constantly to see what's going on. But Cypress always knows what's going on because it exists within the same run loop as your application. And it can execute your test just as fast as your application can run. So, and another benefit to this architecture is that now you have native access to the DOM and the code of your app, which means you're not just making requests against the state of the browser, but you can actually, check the state of your app's internals, right? So, for example, you have a central state management, system, and you can be, like React, some Flux-based architecture or something like that, and you can go ahead and just check that and make assertions against that. You live inside your application as well when you're using Cypress, and you have native access, JavaScript access to everything in your app. So what's one benefit of this? So one of the things that most applications need to test is, logging in. Well, how do you go about doing that? Well, usually login pages look something like this. You have a username field, a password field, and a login button. Well, a lot of views in your app probably require authentication. So does that mean you have to keep, in your test, keep driving this UI to authenticate that view? I mean, would you every single time you have to go in, type in the username, type in a password, click login to do the authentication? Well, that's not very efficient, and it's a bit of a waste. But what you can do is you can have one test that tests your UI, the UI of your login and your authentication setup. After that, you're done. Now you have confidence that authentication works. From that point and on, you can programmatically authenticate the user or the view or whatever, because you have direct access to your application. You don't need to go here and drive the UI and type in everything and click login. You don't need to do that. You can just directly with JavaScript just authenticate the user, and this is going to allow you to save time and write more efficient tests. So this is one of the advantages of Cypress's architecture. Another thing that is enabled by the architecture of Cypress is this new concept we're calling component testing. And we'll get into a little bit to some examples of that. But we have these unofficial component testing libraries, and we have them in every flavor for any framework, of course, including Angular. And what these allow you to do is just to test a particular component in isolation. So I think I have a little diagram to kind of demonstrate that a little bit. It's a little simplistic, but I think it drives the point. So, right now, when we were looking at that to-do MVC app, and we can go back to it, I had to load the entire application here, right? And I'm testing all of the app all at once, right? And that's great. We should be doing that. But a lot of the times, you just want to test a single component. What if I just want to test maybe this bottom bar here, which could be a completely different component than this input box here, right? And obviously this is a simple application, but you can see, once you have like a large application where everything is broken up into various components, well, can you easily go about just testing individual components and having a real good confidence in individual components? And then it's really easy to just put these components together to make your final app. So you can use one of these component testing libraries to do that. So we can grab the Angular one, and then once you do that, you can just specify a particular Angular component, and we'll take that component and mount just that component into the DOM. That's it, only that component. Now that component is mounted into a real browser, and you can run normal Cypress tests against it. And it's really nice. So let's go and look at an example. And this example is in Vue. Again, everything is kind of agnostic, but in this case, you would have Cypress Angular unit test library, and all these component testing libraries are going to provide you a mount function, and you're just going to use that mount function to mount whatever component you have. All you got to do is you import in the component that you've written, and then before your test starts, so I'm using the before each hook here to mount my component. Once that's done, that's it. That's all you got to do. Now the whole world that you're looking at is just that component, and you can go right ahead and make any assertion you want and test it however you like using the Cypress API. Okay, so another thing that Cypress enables, and it's also due to its architecture, is this notion of automatic waiting. So if we go back here, in these tests, we don't have to add weights or sleeps or things like that to kind of await the state of the app. We don't have to say like, oh well, wait for 10 minutes, or sorry, 10 seconds, let's say, for this input box to appear, or wait for 5 seconds for this button to do this or change its state or anything like that. That takes a lot of guesswork, and that's just more work a developer has to do. Now with Cypress, this becomes a lot easier. So for example, if we go back to that initial test we had where we're just loading the app up and seeing if our input box is selected or focused, right? Well, let's go ahead and break that, and let's see how things change. So I'm just going to go here into the source of the app. Okay, so this is just like, oh, here's the input field we have, and it's designed so that it gets autofocused into that input box. So let's break that. Let's break that, and now we can go ahead and just run this test. Now we're running it, and now you see Cypress is waiting here. It's like, it's just blue, and then it was waiting, and now it failed. I'm going to stop the whole test run. And let's just run it again just to kind of see. So it's trying to see, hey, I'm waiting for this input box to be focused, but I waited, nothing happened. So what was going on there? Cypress was waiting up to 4 seconds for the input box to be focused, and this could be any other assertion, right? It could be anything. But the important thing here is that Cypress is doing the waiting for you. You don't have to come up with these specific time frames. By default, it's 4 seconds. We found that to be a general same default for most assertions, but it's completely configurable, and you can do that, in your Cypress config. But that's great because you don't have to do all that waiting yourself. And also, by the way, this is how things look like when an assertion fails. It's marked red, and we'll always try to give you a very helpful message. And we're actually working hard to better communicate, error message and things like that, because we never want to, give you something that's not meant to be read by a human, essentially. Okay. So another thing that you get, and you should expect from any solid testing framework, is easy stubbing, mocking, and spying, and so on. So let's kind of go ahead and see how that works. Now, one of the most common things you would want to stub and mock, and stub and mock in any app is our API endpoints, right? Because sometimes you just like to be, you want to be able to get started on the front end with, and the API isn't ready yet, and you have your front end and you want to start testing things. Well, you can go ahead and just mock your back end. Well, before we get into the specifics on how you can go about mocking things, let's just kind of get some fundamentals down here. So over here, we want to go ahead and test this get to-dos endpoint. And so the endpoint is to-dos, and we want to test when we're making a get request to it, right? So we want to start our our Cypress mock server, you can kind of say, and that's just using the server command. That's it, you're done. And then you're going to specify the route that you want to deal with. In this case, it's the to-dos route, and we only care when there's a get request against it. Now, we want to be able to refer to this route, this /to-dos route, throughout our test. How can we go about doing that? Well, a good way to do that is aliasing this route, or just giving it a human referenceable name. And we can do that using the as command. So we can say, hey, from now on, this route, we're going to refer to it as just a to-dos route. And then later on in my test, I can refer to this endpoint using the syntax by just prefixing it with the @ symbol. So in this test, after we've kind of set up this route, we're going to say, okay, wait upon this to-dos route, then let's go ahead and make an assertion on the response body. Notice that I don't have to, do anything else or add any weights or anything like that. When our app gets loaded, it's already making this get request to this to-dos route. We didn't have to initiate it or do anything. All we care about is like, hey, if there was a request to this endpoint, Let me know when it's done. That's all I care about. And then I can go on and do other things like make an assertion. So aliasing routes and other things is a very helpful mechanism when doing these types of tests. Great. So now that we have that out of the way, this is just another demonstration of like how you can do the same thing, but with other types of requests. Like now you're making a post request instead of a get request, things like that. But now let's talk about stubbing a response. Well, this is again referring to our to-do list application, and we're making a get request to this to-dos endpoint, and we don't have an API or anything, and we want to mock or stub the response. Well, initially there are no to-dos, nothing. So let's just send this empty array, and that's just the third argument of this route command. Just an empty array. There's nothing. There's no to-dos right now at this point in time, and that's as simple as that. Just provide the response that you would like to be the response of this route as the third argument in the route command. That's it. Now, obviously, that's one criteria for testing this endpoint. But obviously, you have times where you would like to respond with a bunch of data, and you can go ahead and type that data out here, like any JavaScript object, no problem. But typically, responses are large for big applications. And there should be a sane way of handling that. And one approach is using fixtures. And this is something that's kind of built into Cypress. So in your Cypress directory, you can in your Cypress directory, you have this other folder called the fixtures folder, and you can dump in my to-dos or whatever, any type of data JSON file into this fixtures folder. And then in your tests, you can refer to it by prefixing it with this fixture colon right here. And this way Cypress knows, okay, I'm going to go to the fixture folder and get that right JSON response. And that's it. This is an easy way to referencing, to data. Okay. And so, we've kind of scratched the surface a bit. We're talking about Cypress, and we saw some of the benefits of its architecture and some of the nice things it provides. But all this lends itself to writing very flake-free, consistent, reliable, deterministic tests. And that's really one of the things that developers love about Cypress. And one of the things that has won over a lot of developers is due to this, because in other frameworks, this was something that's really hard to get right. And so let's see how Cypress, makes this a reality. How can we have these very reliable deterministic tests get executed? Well, the thing is, when you're writing Cypress tests, don't think of it as just like writing, imperative JavaScript, right? What you're actually doing is you're declaratively stating the actions you want the browser to take, and then Cypress will go through your tests, see those actions you stated and those assertions that you said, and it will execute them in the order that you've written them in. So for example, excuse me, we have this three lines over here in our code, and the first thing that's going to happen is first we're going to get this to-do list item, and then we're going to make an assertion on it. And then the next thing we're going to do is get this main item, and then we're going to make an assertion on it, and so on. But the important thing is Cypress will take your code, and then it will create a queue out of that, and it will execute this queue in the exact order that you've written them in your code. And this way, everything happens in the exact sequence that you're expecting it to. Okay, so that's a little word about the flake freeness that Cypress enables. Another awesome thing that it enables is debuggability. Well, remember, we were just running our tests in what? We were running it in Chrome, right? And what's Chrome? Chrome is, just like every other browser. Well, what's in it? What's in every other browser? Well, in the inspector, right? So this lends itself to you having a much easier time debugging your app, because you have access to everything DevTools has to offer. So you can not only debug your app, but also test your app at the same time, all in one place. And this is extremely convenient and a nice addition to a daily workflow. And also, when you're playing around with the command log, when you click on anything, click on a command, will actually as you're clicking on the command, we'll populate the console and DevTools with extra information about that command. So over here, you can click on an assertion. I can go ahead and click on us visiting this URL. I mean, depending on what action that it took place, we'll give you more details about it. And this allows for easier inspection of what's going on. But again, the awesome thing is better debuggability because you're just using DevTools. And so it's just a little screenshot about that. Okay. So now the Cypress architecture I kind of showed you in the past wasn't really the full story. There's a whole nother part to this. Now, the thing that executes your test lives within the browser, but Cypress, has to get brought up, and then there's a lot of other things. And that all happens in the Cypress node backend. And this is like the home base of how things operate. And this node backend is just like any other application on your system, right? With this, you kind of get some other superpowers. One of them is this execute command, and this allows you to write to execute general purpose scripts on the system level, right? So far, everything we've talked about lives in the browser world, right? But sometimes we need to do things to prepare the world for our test, right? Like seeding a database and so on. And that stuff needs to happen at the operating system level, right? So, we can write a bash script to bring up certain processes, seed databases, clear out things. It varies from app to app, but this is the nice general purpose way to just executing something at the system level. So we can take a look at an example of that. Let's say you have an app that has a Ruby on Rails backend, right? Well, you're using Rake to handle migrations and database management. So you can just execute the Rake command, and that's it, using the Cypress execute command. And you can even make assertions on the response of that command too. So this is very nice, and you can also use this to run general purpose npm scripts, so on. Pretty much everything you type in the command line is fair game here. Now, when you're playing with JavaScript, you're probably used to doing a lot of things in JavaScript, right? Maybe you don't want to type, you don't want to write a bash script or do anything of the, use any other like CLI tool or anything like that. Well, you can, if you want to do things all in JavaScript, you can use the task command. And this is another general purpose way of executing JavaScript at the system level. So for example, before each of my tests run, I want to make sure that my database is all in a particular state. Well, I can specify this this task called defaults DB here, and I'll just execute that before each of my tests. And then if we look at how that task looks like, well, I have some sort of code around managing my database. I'll just import that in, and then I can just specify this defaults DB function, and just a general purpose function, so you can put anything you want in there, and this will get executed at the system level. So that's all nice. So before we proceed, any questions so far?
Yep, we have.
Does the mic work from this distance?
Can you hear us okay?
Yeah.
Let me turn off.
It's fine. I can come here. Okay. So, do you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. So you said that the application is stateful. What about cleanup? How do you do cleanup, and how does it work? What happens if I'm playing on the website, I log in, and then I run the test to assume that I'm not logged in? How does that work?
So first you go in, you log in, and then you're saying
my normal browser, and after that I run the test. How does that work?
Okay, so let's create an example here. So you go in, you log in, now you change the state of your app, right? Well, it depends on what kind of test you're writing. Generally, the pattern, the good practice that you should do is tests should not rely on previous tests, right? Every test should be able to successfully execute independently and in isolation of each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about something else here. If I log in, I set my own cookies on my own browser. And then when I run the test will run with my own browser, which will use the cookies that I have inside it.
Okay, so once you set up your state, what is it that you want to do next?
So I log in now. I open Chrome. I log in. I do my normal stuff, and after that, I want to run some tests. The test will run in Chrome again, using my cookies that I have stored in Chrome. So that will be my tests.
Okay.
Is there a step cleanup, something like that, that cleans the cookies storage?
It depends on you. So you can have anything run before or after a test, right? So depending on what you're trying to get accomplished in your test, I mean, it's context specific. So you can clear up the cookies or clear up any authentication state before individual tests get executed. So it depends on what your app is, but you have full capabilities because it's all JavaScript, right? To clear out cookies and deal with all that. And Cypress has specific commands around this too for dealing with cookies and things like that.
Okay. I have other questions. I have a list. So, okay. How do you do mobile desktop resolution basically and user agent? Can you do that, or?
You can change the viewport size as you're testing. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
So you can totally do that. If you go into this kitchen sink examples, we actually have let me see. Yeah, there we go. Here's a viewport spec, and this one kind of shows. So you can actually just use the viewport command and just set the specific dimensions you want for your viewport, and it's a nice way to do responsive testing.
Okay.
And about the user agent.
Can you mock the user agent?
Can you mock the user agent? So I believe not this time. I actually haven't needed to do that in the past. But we're working on full network stubbing, where you can change anything about a network. So I think maybe we can go look at the docs for it. Actually, this is good. So I actually wanted to show this later on, but we can kind of do it now. So by the way, this is our docs. This is like your go-to place for everything. It's really great. People love it. It's like the best. So let's go to the route command. So always go to the search thing. It's really good for auto completion, and you can see everything that a particular command can do, and we have a lot of them. So if you want to mock the response of something, so you can kind of see all the options you have available to you. So you can set the headers. So that's one way you can set the user agent via headers.
Okay, but that's only for HTTP requests. If you want to, for example, you have a component that reacts differently, show something on different browser, that's a different kind of mock.
Yeah, so if you're getting the user agent directly like from the browser API, I mean, you have access to window and document, right? So you can just change those programmatically as well.
Okay.
Yeah, but not only about changing this, about changing the full engine, because
you open in your browser that you want, probably.
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other question?
Maybe we can. Amir, you want us to leave you finish your presentation, and then we can ask all the questions.
Sure.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, because I know there's always a lot of questions that I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Maybe you'll answer some of them.
Yeah.
But
okay.
For sure, there'll be questions afterwards.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so kind of jumping back into things, and so far we've been looking at Cypress and the developer in your developer workflow, right? We've been using the Cypress open command to bring up an instance of Cypress, and you can have your editor on one side and Cypress open up another side, two different windows, and you can make changes to your code, and then Cypress will automatically detect that and do live reloading, and it's a great experience. But a lot of times is you're running tests in CI, right? Excuse me. So how do you go about doing that? How do you go about running Cypress headlessly? Well, there's the second command that Cypress offers, which is the run command, and this is what you would use to run Cypress in your CI environment, and this is a more efficient way of running all your tests which is what you would need to do when you're, when you're doing testing in your CI pipeline. And also, we'll get to this, but you can also record your Cypress test results into our dashboard service, and I'll show that in a second as well. So we can kind of get into it right now. So we've been talking about the Cypress, the test runner, right? This is the open source tool and everything like that, and that's what you can use. Let's see, where's the actual? There's so many Chromes. All right. But there's a whole nother complementary side to Cypress, and that's the Cypress dashboard. And when you're writing Cypress in CI, you can't see what's going on, right? In your development workflow, you can see everything. You see the browser come up, you see the application getting manipulated, and everything. But when you're running in CI, you can't see anything. It's all a black box. How do you go about fixing that? Well, this is the actual test for the Cypress dashboard. We use our own stuff to test things. But so when something fails, we take screenshots. So for example, here's like a particular screenshot that we took when an error took place. And we also even take full video recordings when something goes wrong. You can kind of look at this video and see exactly what went wrong. Otherwise, how else would you be able to see what went wrong in there? So this is the examples of a test running. And the cool thing about this video is that you can link it out to a colleague, maybe a designer or someone else that particularly worked in this particular view or was responsible for this particular feature. Be like, hey, this is exactly what went wrong, and here's a full video. And they don't have to go ahead and set up and reproduce this problem. Maybe they can just look at the video and immediately know, like, oh, I know why, because of this particular thing, this is wrong in the wrong place, and blah, blah, blah. So, in the dashboard, we show you all the spec files in your project, and we give you information about them. So we say, how many passed, how many failed, how many were skipped, how long the spec file took to run. And we even give you the normal standard output you're used to seeing when running Cypress in the in the command as a CLI tool. So this is great. It's very helpful. And when things do fail, you can actually go into the failures tab, and we'll show you every single failed test and give you more information about them. We group them by the spec files over here. So this is very helpful. Much better way to visually see what went wrong. And each of these things have their own like little links, which you can link out to colleagues, which is very nice. So overall, the dashboard gives you better introspection into your test runs when you're running in CI, and it's a nice point of collaboration as well when you're working in teams. Now, that's great and all, but there's a superpower to the dashboard, and that's parallelization, and we can kind of get into that. So parallelization. So once you're recording to the dashboard is now starting to understand the performance characteristics of your tests. And based off that, it can optimize your test runs across your CI environment. So let's say you have multiple machines. Well, how can we go about running all your tests, all your spec files across your different CI resources in an optimal way so we can minimize the time it takes to test everything? So let's kind of go through this example. Let's say you have this new fancy app and you want to test it. So you dedicate 3 machines in your CI world to test your app. Each of these machines are going to be running Cypress, and they're going to use this parallel flag to run in parallelization mode. And once they do that, all these machines are going to come online most likely around the same time, or even at the exact point in time. So whoever is the first one to come online is going to contact Cypress dashboard service, and it's going to say, hey, I'm ready for work. And Cypress is going to say, okay, great. What would you like to do? And then it's like, well, I have all these spec files to run for my fancy app. Which one should I get started on first? Well, Cypress is going to say, okay, great. Let me look at the historical, performance characteristics of your tests. And based off that, I think it's best for you to go ahead and start testing this login spec file. And then the second machine is going to come online, and then Cypress is going to say, you should get started on the sign up spec, and so on. the way it works is that we're assigning the longest running spec file, historically speaking, first, because we want to get started on the thing that takes the longest to run, right? So this is kind of the simplistic way it operates. But how do we go about kind of load balancing your spec files across your CI environments? Again, as I said, as you're using the dashboard service, we understand how long each individual spec file takes to execute. And this way we can do some fancy math and we can forecast the future runtime of that spec file. And that's how we can determine, if this particular test spec file should run first, second, third, or so on. But it's a nice way to optimize tests in CI, and it works really great. So, and we do this auto balancing thing every single time you run your tests on the fly for every single spec file. So you always have the most optimal test run. And so how does this look? What are the real world effects of this? So we have these 3 sections right here. This is actually for our Cypress example kitchen sink, which was the first thing I showed you. It had all those various example test files. The first section here is showing testing of that kitchen sink app when we're just using 1 machine. And the second box is showing when we're using 2 machines, and the third box is showing when we're using 4 machines. Well, when we're just running everything on 1 machine, it was taking just about 2 minutes to run the whole thing, which is okay. But then we add a second machine and the time gets halved. And then when we double the machines again, it gets halved again. So the math works out real great. But you're saying, Amir, this is not a real world application. 2 minutes isn't too long. It doesn't really matter. Well, let's look at a real world app. Well, the real world app we know about is the Cypress dashboard. It's a big React application. Has a lot of users and so on. So before we were using parallelization, we were just using 1 machine. And it would take about 23 minutes to run our test. And again, that's not a trivial time, right? You have developers sitting, waiting, hoping that everything passes. But when we added parallelization and we just added 6 machines, we went down from 23 minutes to up to just under 4 minutes. So that's significant time savings right here. And the cool thing about this is you can actually watch your tests come into the dashboard and see them getting failed or passed. So you actually know it much faster when a particular spec file failed because things are happening in parallel and you don't have to wait for a series of tests to finish just to know if one failed. So this is really significant time savings. And since then, we've actually bumped up the amount of machines we use. So I think we use like 15 or 19 or something like that now, and the tests run real quick. One tip I have for everyone out there, and I've learned this, from talking to people and our users all around the world, is that to get the most out of parallelization, you need to break up your tests into different spec files. What I see out a lot in the real world is that people like to shove everything into 1 file, and that's not really good for parallelization because we can't break up your test for you because we don't know what the specifics of your app, right? We can't do that for you. So you got to break up your tests to different context-specific files. This way, we can optimize those tests on your CI machines. And one of the reasons why a lot of people put all their tests in 1 file, at least one of the reasons I've seen, is that people write tests that depend on other tests. And this is an anti-pattern. As I said before, tests should not be dependent on each other. They should be able to successfully be executed and pass all on their own. And this is exactly what you want. And if you do that, then you can easily break up things, and then you can easily optimize and parallelize things and make everything run faster. So overall, parallelization is a nice way to save a lot of time and at the same time save a lot of money. We also have this other thing that kind of came out of parallel parallelization around the same time, is this concept of grouping. So you can actually group different test runs with each other. So let's say you have you want to say, okay, these test runs are for my administration portal, and then these test runs are for my customer portal, and so on. Well, you're like a nice way to name those test runs and group them together, and you can just use the group flag and just give them a particular name. So I can have -- group admin portal, and then once you do that, we'll go ahead and like name those things in the dashboard for you. So for example, I can show you a quick example here. For example, we're running our tests. I think maybe this is a better example here. Let's see. Yeah. So over here, this is our example recipes application, which is open source, and it's kind of a nice repo for learning more about Cypress. So just Google this, and you'll find that it's a great way to. It's a great resource. These labels we have up top here, these are all just our group names, right? We wanted to do our snapshot testing in these spec files, so we grouped them all together and named them, E2E snapshots. You can do whatever you want, name them however you feel like, but it's a nice way to group your spec files and see them all under the same page in the dashboard. Okay, so that kind of concludes things. Again, I would like to point out our docs. Our docs, on the reason why I put so much emphasis on it is that it's one of the reasons why I fell in love with Cypress before even working at Cypress. It's fantastic. It's very extensive. It's very informative and educational. And it's one of the reasons behind the success of Cypress. And we have like a best practices section where a lot of questions are answered, kind of like things regarding authentication or, just how to do SSO authentication, things like that. There's a lot of patterns out there, and we like to and this is a central resource to learn about all of those things. We also have a very large roadmap. We get asked a lot about it. This is also in our doc, so you can kind of go ahead and check that out. One of the things I can tell you already is that we're working on cross-browser support, especially IE 11, which I know a lot of people want. So these are things that are in the pipeline. We're also working on test retries, which should be coming soon. And this kind of helps get rid of false negatives in CI. Like for example, you can have 1,000 tests and 999 of them pass, but one fails. Well, it could just be a mishap in CI. Maybe your CI provider is flaking out. It could be some other silly little problem. It doesn't really mean your test was wrong. It doesn't mean anything was really wrong. Just something at that point in time was off. And so once we add test retries, we can automatically retry that test. So your whole CI pipeline doesn't stop and fail. We kind of automatically handle that. And a lot of people have been asking for this, and we're happy to get this out soon. And if you're looking for this, please reach out to me. I'd like to hear more about your setup and the problems you have. More about learning materials, and I'll make these slides available to everyone so you can have a reference. But we have, video tutorials on our docs. We also have a full testing workshop, so you like to work out through exercises to learn things. That's also in our docs. This is all open source in GitHub. And that's about it. And one thing I like to always say is that, at Cypress, we're working extremely hard to kind of change the status quo of testing on the web. There's so much to do. There's so many problems to solve. But I hope you all will come and give Cypress a try and make it something that is an industry standard. And once that happens, I think everybody benefits because, we're all going to be shipping better quality software. And nowadays, that's such a big portion of people's life. People spend so much time around the web applications we make. So as developers, we have a responsibility to kind of ship quality functioning pieces of software. So with that said, that's all I have for now. I'll be glad to answer any questions. Thank you, and go ahead and give Cypress a try.
Thanks, Amir.
Yeah.
So before we take questions, I just want to say thanks again for joining us and taking the time, and congratulate you and the team for doing such an awesome job. Like
Thank you.
Every time you go on Twitter, like every 100 tweets, it's someone saying how awesome Cypress is and how end-to-end testing just got cool and so on and so forth. So I really think you're doing a great job with Cypress. And as you said, you're contributing to shipping better quality software. So that's actually like very good to have as a mission. So congrats again for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Glad to hear.
Sure. So we continue with the questions because I know there probably are a few.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got a few. Can parallelism run in Docker?
Yeah. So you can, it's agnostic to what your CI setup is. We work well out of the box with all the major CI providers. You know, a lot of them are good, but it doesn't really matter how your CI setup is. It could be in Docker. It could be you setting up 5 machines in your house. It doesn't matter. The way we've designed it is that, yeah, you know, if you're typing in the right commands, we'll automatically associate all the various machines regardless of where they're running in, and bring them all together to help parallelize things for you.
And
So
also,
yes, Docker, yes.
Is dashboard available in on-premise, or is it just cloud?
So the dashboard service is currently not available on-prem. That is something we have in our roadmap to eventually, you know, just make the whole thing available on-prem. But right now, it's a service we operate. But if you have needs for on-prem and you have specific needs, I would like to hear from you, because maybe we can work something out specifically. So
Right.
always feel free to reach out.
All right. And also, can you record and replay requests? So say my app makes some requests, I get some responses back from the server, and I want to record those responses and use those in tests. Can I do that?
No, I haven't seen that happen. At least, you know, if you can use another tool to do the recording for you, and then have that way you kind of generate Cypress, you know, calls. So that you can do that, but recording requests is not something that's built into Cypress. At least not right now. Yeah.
And one last one. Can it assert render results? Say a pop-up is on top of everything, which is something that is quite hard to do programmatically. So you need to look at the render results, like the actual page.
Mm-hmm. So you mean a different window?
Just a modal or something.
A modal, yeah, you can totally do that. Again, you know, Cypress lives in the browser, so you can detect like you know, if the particular you know, ID or class of that modal is present in the DOM very easily.
Not just present, but on top.
Visually on top. So I think you can get so at that point, depending on the class structure you're using, so you can make an assertion on that, or you can do visual testing on this. So we integrate very well with other visual testing tools. We're actually going to have a webinar. If you kind of check out our Twitter world, we're having a webinar with Percy.io and also Apply tools, and they integrated very well with Cypress to do visual testing. So those are coming out soon. So I would be on the lookout for those, and those work really nice.
All right, thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay, so I have one more question. You answered most of the questions that for him. Does the parallel servers run on premise? Or
parallelism?
Yeah, the servers that we run the test on. Do they?
Yeah. So to use that, you would need to use our dashboard service, and that's currently something we offer. But it's in our roadmap to offer it on-prem. Now, the reason why it's required, we need a backend service to operate parallelization for you, is that we need a place to record previous runtimes to understand the performance characteristics of your tests, so we can run our performance optimization algorithms on it to do the load balancing on your CI machines. So this is not like dumb parallelization where it's like, oh, 5 spec files and 5 machines, just like, you know, just give each file a particular spec file. It's actually a much smarter way of doing it. We're taking the historical context and the performance of your test runs into consideration when doing this.
That's it.
Yeah. Any other?
Okay. I have a question about Shadow DOM. Is it on the roadmap? And if it is,
I'm sorry, what was that? I couldn't hear you.
I'm just gonna come closer. Sorry. So, is Shadow DOM on your timeline for support? And if so,
oh, Shadow DOM. Are you using Polymer or something?
Well, it's not that we're using Polymer. We have some legacy apps in Polymer, but that will not change with Open Web specification. Shadow DOM will still be part of the specification.
Yeah, I don't believe so. Actually, let me the roadmaps are changing, so let's see. I know there's an issue out for it.
Yeah, there are some GISTs, I guess, for some commands that we use to test our apps, but Automatic waiting is not really a feature that is supported so far in Shadow DOM.
Yeah, so Shadow DOM, it's not something we support out of the box right now. I think there are some workarounds out there. So if you look into our GitHub issues, that's actually also another good resource. A lot of this stuff gets sorted out there. But it is a question we kind of get here and there. But it is not something that's prioritized currently, and it's probably due to not enough people telling us they need Shadow DOM. But the fact that you're telling me right now is helping with that. So I'll definitely keep that in mind.
Yeah. Just as a fun fact, you can check the open components initiative, and you'll see it's getting quite some traction. And
awesome. That's great to hear. And again, like anytime you guys feel like something is missing with the tool, always feel free to directly reach out, because like whatever you say, like it truly matters. It affects us, in prioritizing things.
Cool. Thanks.
No problem.
Was related to what you have.
So one last question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if nobody, so because probably some of the participants are working with Angular, and we all know the Angular CLI comes by default with Protractor. I was curious what your thoughts are on how difficult it is to migrate. For example, if you have like hundreds or thousands of tests in Protractor to migrate them in Cypress, like how difficult might that be? Like, can you keep someone there, or
so
because migrating is such a trendy term right now.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we all want that one magical button that does everything for us, right? But there's no easy answer to this. I mean, if you're migrating from one tool to another, it's going to require rewriting things in that API, right, for that tool. So there's no easy migration path from Protractor to Cypress. Okay. But I would say that depending on how you wrote your Protractor tests before, if you start rewriting them in Cypress, I wouldn't go try to do a carbon copy of your Protractor test, right? I would go ahead and look at Cypress API and see a way to minimize the tests you had written in the past, because in Cypress you can write big end-to-end tests and run them very deterministically, which means you probably might have to write less tests, but you're still going to be testing just as much, if not more. So there's no easy path. You're going to have to use the Cypress API to rewrite things, but it could be a welcome change.
Cool. Thanks.
So, no problem.
I guess with that, we can wrap it up. Again, thanks very much for joining us and for the presentation. It's been really informative. And yeah, hope to see you again at our future event.
Sounds great. Let me know. I hope to come to Romania soon for one of your conferences.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll be in touch. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for having me. And if you all have any other questions, just feel free to reach out to me directly. I'll be happy to help out.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. You guys have a good one. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.